Paul Christie would jump in and interfere in my matches. That's why I asked for this handicap tag team match.
Do you remember the first time you stepped into an arena to witness a collision of good versus evil? The excitement in the air, the roar of the crowd, and of course, the blood. It's time to relive those memories big time. A historical wrestling lesson taught by your professors, the legendary Terry Sullivan and Supermouth Dave Drason. Rocks TV and International Big Time Wrestling present Big Time Memories.
Hello everyone, Big Time Memories is back on the air. I'm Terry Sullivan. This is my buddy Dave Drason, photographer extraordinaire, who's many of the pictures that you'll see on this program today are exclusive pictures that you took because you were the ringside photographer for Big Time Wrestling forever and ever, and also published in many of the wrestling magazines.
Yeah, as a kid, I would, write stories, send my pictures in, now they're in books and, my books that I had and, other books like, this one on Dick the Bruiser, some of my pictures are in there and, they're all in the new Chic book too. We'll have to talk about that at some point in time.
See, I can't imagine who our subject is for today's program.
I don't know.
I should have looked at the picture. Should have looked at the book. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the
Dick the Bruiser.
One of the biggest names in professional wrestling history.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, a guy who was on top for decades and just tore up the rings and ring sides and opponents around the country, eventually became a fan favorite.
Yeah.
One of the biggest fan favorites of all time.
I mean, if you talk about, causing riots beside Bull Curry, Dick the Bruiser, almost every, territory he went, there was a riot somewhere going on.
And we'll talk about one special riot that Dick the Bruiser was involved in coming up a little bit later.
Yeah. And what was his real name?
William Fritz Afflis, A-F-F-L-I-S.
Yep. And he was born June 27th, 1929 in Lafayette, Indiana. And as a young kid, he had a rich upbringing. His parents were very well-to-do. I forgot what his father did for a living, but it might have been in real estate or something, but he had a rich upbringing as a kid, and very fortunate. And his mother was heavy into politics in Indiana, he was very well to do.
Yeah, she was a congressman for the state of Indiana on the Democratic ticket, and that influence came in very, very handy when Dick the Bruiser was looking to purchase a license to promote wrestling in the state of Indiana, which was a very difficult thing to achieve, and more often than not took somebody with some political swag to get it through. And that's what Bruiser's mother did. Yeah,
starting in 1946. So, when he was still a teenager, she was, heavy into politics.
Yeah.
But then, after he graduated high school, he went to the University of Purdue, or Purdue University, whichever way you want to say it.
He graduated from there, I assume?
No, he didn't.
He didn't?
He only went there 3 years.
What happened?
Well, he went there to play football.
Yeah.
And in his third year, he got kicked off the team.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I guess there was one day his coach was reprimanding him in front of his other teammates. And Dick the Bruiser, or, Richard Athlas at that time, took his helmet off and he, beat the coach over the head with the helmet. And he got kicked off the team.
I can't imagine. Dick
Yeah.
the Bruiser, already raising hell.
Yeah. So, he couldn't play at Purdue. And I don't know what took him out to Nevada, but he ended up signing with the University of Nevada. He sat out the 1949 season. He didn't play in 1949 because he transferred. But then he sat out the 1950 season when he transferred to the University of Nevada. And he went there with a degree in engineering. And while he was at the University of Nevada, he worked at the Reno Herald's Club Casino as a bouncer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that, he was making money, and, he was big in stature, for a younger guy,
And
especially being...
College football player, he was probably somewhat known.
Yeah. But the ironic thing is that he never played a game of football at the University of Nevada.
Why is that?
Because I think it was in 1951, University of Nevada canceled their football program. So, he transferred there to play football, never got to play, one game at all.
Wow. I hope he kept his scholarship.
Yeah. But, while he was, a bouncer at the casino, and also, he had an interest in wrestling, and him and one of his football teammates would wrestle around, in their dorm room or somewhere, just, working around holds and stuff like that. So he really made his technical wrestling debut, not for a big company or anything, on January 27th, 1951. And he performed at a halftime show. Him and his partner performed wrestling at a halftime show at the University of Nevada. And he wrestled, his teammate's name was Buddy Brooks. And he wrestled him as Bill Athlas. So that's how he, got into wrestling, right off the, performed at a halftime show.
Yeah.
But never did it again.
Yeah.
Just in that 1951. But he still had that reputation from other players from Purdue that he, played with.
Yeah, he must have been a real tiger on the field.
Yeah, I mean, he was big in stature, and I think he, played, tackle and guard. So you had to be pretty big at that point.
Yeah.
And he was selected 186th overall in the 16th round of the National Football League draft in 1951.
Oh.
So he was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. Powerhouse, back then. This is, all pre-Super Bowl. They only had, the National Football League championship, at that time, which that's probably the last time the Detroit Lions ever got mentioned, because they won a couple championships back, I think, in 53 and 54 or something like that. And God, the only way the Lions go to the Super Bowl now is if,
buy a ticket.
Yeah, they buy a ticket. But, he played tackle and guard for, the Green Bay Packers from 1951 through 1954.
Didn't he suffer an injury while he was playing there?
Yeah, he got hit in the larynx, and which caused him to have, a very gravelly voice.
Yeah.
Which, became, synonymous
Trademark,
with, just the name Dick the Bruiser in wrestling.
Yeah.
But he wrestled in the off season. While he was, playing football. And, a lot of guys, did that in the off season, like Alex Karras did
Ernie
that.
Ladd early on.
Ernie Ladd.
Wahoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they, they didn't make a lot of, the big time money that, sports stars these days made. They didn't make millions back then.
Yeah.
They were probably, paid per game. So if Bruiser made $300 a game, or $300-400 a week, playing for the Packers, that was probably big money back then. But during the off season, well, you need something to make an income.
Sure.
So he worked wrestling in the off season, and technically he was trained by Vern Gagne and Joe Posadek.
Joe was a veteran. He was an old timer.
Yeah.
We're sort of wondering, due to their relatively close, they were close. Bruiser and Gagne were close in age. And
Yeah.
I wonder, would Gagne really train
I
Bruiser?
think maybe Gagne had a few years already in the wrestling
Think so?
business.
Yeah, could have
so
been.
he, technically a couple of years in, you're a veteran now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I'm sure he could have showed, Bruiser, some moves and stuff like that.
Now that makes sense, yeah, show him the more modern things and something other than a punch and a kick and a heel below the belt or something.
Yeah. But being trained by them, he made his, technical second debut in 1955 versus Stan Maslack. Another big name that's been lost, in the wrestling annals.
Yeah.
And, I've never heard of the guy before, so I don't know if he was an enhancement talent or, what he was, but, that's when he made his debut. And that would have been January 7th, 1955 in Winnipeg.
Wow.
And his name then was Dick Afflis.
Oh.
He wasn't Dick the Bruiser yet.
Uh-huh.
And then, we talk about, he was, getting a reputation, for his rough style and his finishing hold back then, that he mastered was, coming off the top rope with his knee. It was the knee drop.
Sure, yeah.
And, that came into play when we were talking about, earlier on, you talk about, Dick the Bruiser, you got to, the word in there, Dick the Bruiser, probably Riot, you could, make the word out, with his name.
Yeah.
But it happened on November 19th, 1957. Remember that, when he teamed with Dr. Jerry Graham, and they went against Antonio Rocca and Edward Carpentier.
Oh, yeah.
In, Madison Square Garden in New York.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Well, New York City, Madison Square Garden has always been a place where they tend to highlight ethnic heroes. Bruno Sammartino for the Italian people, in this case Argentina. Rocca was an Italian from Argentina, so he covered a couple of bases. Pedro Morales was a champion, a Puerto Rican guy. And, the interesting thing was when a lot of these guys like Sammartino and Pedro would eventually get beat in the center of the ring, they wouldn't make a ring announcement because they figured the people would riot.
Yeah.
So they would make the ring announcement on the next TV. But anyway, the people are all up in arms. Here's Bruiser and Dr. Jerry Graham. You can imagine what a just a crazy tag team combination they must have made, going against Edward Carpentier and Antonina Rocca.
Yep.
So 12,900 some fans there. After the match, Bruiser was a bad boy.
Oh boy!
Because Bruiser either ran Rocca's head into the steel ring post or smashed him over the head with a chair. I'm not sure, knowing Bruiser, probably both.
Yeah.
But anyway, Antonina Rocca became the proverbial crimson mask. And when the people saw the blood, the people went nuts. It's estimated about 500 people rioted. The police came in, the riot squad for the police came in. They destroyed hundreds of broken chairs, injured a couple of cops. 2 fans were arrested. Over 60 policemen were on hand. And as a result, so the story goes, Dick the Bruiser was banned for life by the New York State Athletic Commission. But in all reality, didn't happen. Fiction, hype. It's wrestling hype, and we'll tell you about that in a second here. Got a picture of the trial, which is just a classic picture that we're going to show you with Bruiser and Rocca, Carpentier, and Dr. Jerry Graham all sitting lined up, waiting to face the music, waiting to face the judge. And one thing I want to call your attention to in the picture, look at Dr. Jerry Graham and look what he's got in his fingers. Sitting in the courtroom with a cigar.
Well, I thought it would have been a vodka bottle.
That was in his pocket. I'm sure he had a flask.
Yeah.
But that's just classic Dr. Jerry Graham. I doubt the cigar was lit, but still, that's just Jerry saw a photographer and said, hey, what about that? Show you what I think of this court. So anyway, there were various fines and everything, but Bruiser was fined more than anybody else because they say that he was really the one that started it, more or less. And
but they said that he was banned for life.
yeah, and Bruiser told Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. that he never went back, but that's not the truth, and we've got the facts to prove it, all of which you can find in Scott Teal's book, Madison Square Garden History. Bruiser's permanent New York State ban didn't last very long because he did appear at the next Madison Square Garden show, which happened on December the 9th. Bruiser went against Mark's brother, Don Lewin. Then he came back that following February to Madison Square Garden, was beaten by Eduardo Carpentier. He wrestled in Buffalo that October of 58, June of 58, and August of 58, he was back into Madison Square Garden again. So the whole lifetime ban thing was fiction. I sort of think that maybe there was something going on with Bruiser and the promoters behind the scenes, and Bruiser just decided, I'm not going to go back there. I'm not going to be kowtowing to some silly commission and not making the money I want to make. But one definite result that I'm sure you have heard of that came about as a result of this riot was the commission ruled that anyone under 14 years of age was banned from attending the wrestling matches at Madison Square Garden. And that rule lasted until the late 80s when Vince McMahon came in and did whatever Vince McMahon does. It made that law go away.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting, though.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, to this, before we started doing our research on this, I thought that, Dick the Bruiser banned from New York, Athletic Commission.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you told me, that's not true. It's like, oh, boy, that's an eye-opener.
There's a lot of things like Wild Bull Curry was banned from 4 foreign countries. No, never happened. The Sheik was banned from 15 states. No.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Just one of those things you say.
Yeah, well, it's all hype.
Yeah.
Back then, a lot of hype.
Yeah.
But, when you talk about Dick the Bruiser and, our hometown of Detroit, the territory, he made his debut in Detroit on April 11th, 1959 versus Yukon Eric. And that would have been at the Olympia Stadium. And in his debut match with Yukon Eric, at the finish of the match, Yukon Eric got his head caught in the ropes, so he's, working it and the referee's trying to, free him and stuff. And Dick the Bruiser's debut in Detroit almost started a riot because dozens of fans tried to get into the ring to help Yukon Eric, help the referee to get his head out.
Because they think he's choking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what the result was. Either Bruiser got disqualified or...
I'd say that's a safe bet.
Yeah, that or, Yukon Eric got counted out or something. I don't know the result, but, his debut in Detroit in 1959 almost starts a riot.
Yep. Set the trend for what was to come.
And what was to come, starting in 1959, at the Olympia Stadium in Detroit, he headlined 39 out of the next 41 shows.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Wow, that is just fantastic.
So that is how big he was in this territory.
I mean, that is real longevity for a main eventer. Usually they, after 4 or 5 shows, it sort of fizzles out, but they just kept feeding him opponent after opponent. Huh?
Yeah.
Lord Layton, I know, was one of his frequent opponents.
Layton, Bobo, Cowboy Bob Ellis.
Snyder.
Wilbur Snyder,
Yeah.
who later became his business partner.
Yeah, right.
Leaping Larry Shane. And Antonino Rocca.
Yeah.
They were all those big stars were coming into Detroit at that time.
Yeah.
And he was taking them all on. And it's like, they were doing big business here back then.
Yeah.
And then one of the big shows that happened, they were going to have Dick the Bruiser versus Bobo Brazil, and they were going to hold it at Tiger Stadium.
Oh boy!
So they were, hoping to draw, big crowd.
Right.
Tiger Stadium back at that time would have held 59,000, I think, at the time. But if, they set up the ring on the infield, I'm sure that, people in the center field bleachers, I'm sure they wouldn't have sold those tickets. So a lot of the outfield tickets, I'm sure they wouldn't have sold. But they were hoping to draw at least, 30,000 or more. And the show took place on Friday night, June 23rd, 1961. And they had an alternate date for the next day, Saturday, the 24th, in case of rain. And, of course, what happened on Friday, the 23rd? It rained.
Yeah.
And they only drew 11,000 people instead of, drawing, more if they would have waited till the Saturday.
Well, people say 11,000 people. What are you complaining about drawing 11,000? But imagine what it would have taken to open the doors of was it Briggs Stadium then or Tiger Stadium, and all the security and all the hype and the advertising and all the superstars of wrestling they brought in.
Vendors, police,
right.
the commission's take.
Yeah.
For the 11,000, they could have filled the Olympia with that one.
So they probably made money, but not nearly as much as they thought they would.
Yeah, they hyped that big time, and, it sort of, fell flat.
Actually, they were expecting 30,000 people and a $100,000 gate. The gate was 36,866.
Yeah. It's because back then, remember, wasn't it Buddy Rogers and Pat O'Connor fought at Comiskey Park in Chicago?
Yeah.
And I thought they had well, it would have been later. I think it was in the 70s. Bruno Sammartino and Killer Kowalski at, was it Shea Stadium?
Yeah.
So, big ballpark shows were a big thing.
Oh, sure.
In the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Pittsburgh,
going
they
on,
did it too.
Yeah. But sorry to say, the Bruiser Bobo one fell a little flat.
And so did Bobo. Bruiser beat him 2 out of 3 falls.
Oh, Bruiser took the victory then.
He did?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
I didn't even know the result of that one.
Yeah.
I just know I know
That's
all
why
the
I'm
other
here.
I know all the other statistics. I didn't know who won that one. But Dick the Bruiser, talking about him, worked mainly in Indianapolis. That was his home. He lived in Indianapolis. But he also worked, like we know, New York, Atlanta. He was real big out in L.A., for the longest time.
Sure. Yeah.
He worked for, Sam Muchnick in St. Louis for the longest time, too.
Oh, yeah.
He was big
Decades.
in St. Louis,
30 years.
Worked in Japan, worked in the AWA for one of his trainers, Vern Gagne. He worked that territory. And he worked, Detroit, of course.
Yeah.
Like we said, 39 out of 41 shows.
Yeah.
And, let's talk about another big show.
Did you talk about Chicago also? Because he wrestled a lot in Chicago, but he was partners in Chicago with Vern Gagne.
Yeah.
So whatever financial arrangement they had, they were drawing huge crowds. And even when Bruiser wasn't on the card, he still got a payoff as one of the partners.
Yeah, wasn't the promoter Bob Luce?
Well, Bob Luce was the hype man. Vern Gagne was the owner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and then, like you said, Bruiser, Snyder, they were in with them, right?
Snyder was just in Indy with Bruiser. In Chicago, it was Vern and Bruiser.
Okay. Well, another big show that happened, involving Dick the Bruiser. In Detroit, April 23rd, 1963. Do you remember this? Another big one that, sort of fell over like a lead balloon.
I was a baby. I don't remember 1963.
But this was like one of the Bruiser all-time classics.
Oh, yeah. This is talked about for years and years. This is a legendary wrestling story.
Because I think at the time, Alex Karras, who played for the Detroit Lions, I believe he was suspended for betting on football games, or gambling.
Yeah.
So he, was suspended from playing in, the National Football League. So what's he going to do? So he took up wrestling.
Yeah. He had wrestled before a few times.
Yeah,
but
a few.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah, he was a mid-card guy.
Yeah.
Took a victory here and there.
Big guy doing it off season.
So they figured, Dick the Bruiser, who played football, two football guys. Hey, let's go at it. Let's, while you're off and not, let's have a bout. So that was going to happen. So they were going to promote it, and they didn't have internet and things in those days. So how do you, promote,
promote? It takes in a whole lot of area.
Yeah. And there was a bar downtown called the Lindell AC. And AC stood for Athletic Club. And, they say that they were the very first sports club in the nation. And they had, sports memorabilia all over the walls, football, basketball, the Red Wings hockey, and the Tigers baseball, pictures of everywhere. And a lot of the sports guys would come into the bar, to have a beer. Yeah. Oh, God, they had great hamburgers there, too. But they'd come in after, their games and, hang out with fans. And, it was a great place.
Well, the Boutsakeris people were Greek, right?
Right.
And wasn't Karras Greek too? Was that the tie-in?
Alex Karras,
between the two of them? Yeah. So they were friendly.
Yeah. So what they were going to do, Alex Karras was going to be at the bar because sometimes he would be like a guest bartender there. And Karras is going to be there, with the Boutsakeris boys. And Dick the Bruiser was going to come in. And, start a little, back and forth. And just so happened, the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit newspapers were tipped off that, something was going to happen there. And, great press, for the upcoming match. Sure. Well, what happened was the Boutsakeris' uncle, who they didn't let him in on what was going to happen.
Uncle Fester? Boutsakeris?
I forgot what his name was. But they didn't tip him off on, what what they were going to do. Yeah. So when Bruiser, started, a little roughing, with Karras and, the Boutsakeris guys, well, his uncle stepped in and started waylaying, taking a chair and a pool cue, and next thing you know, all hell broke loose, and, Bruiser's, what the heck's going on? And Karras, same thing. It's like, this is getting a little out of hand.
We got a picture of Bruiser, too, after this was over.
Yeah.
He looked a little rough.
Yeah, so they ended up, somebody ended up calling the Detroit Police Department. The policemen show up. And now they're not in on it either, and they're thinking, well, this melee, this is, for real. Well, they get in on the act, and they start roughing up Bruiser, and the Bruiser, he ain't going to take that. No. So he, starts wailing on the police. And I guess one of the policemen, got hurt real bad.
Yeah. Another one got hurt. Two of them got hurt, I believe, but one pretty bad.
Yeah. And, the police called, everybody's injured, it was just, bad for everything.
Yeah.
And then what happened, I think it was the following Saturday at the Olympia, it just didn't draw.
No.
The big thing, on, the television and newspaper about Bruiser, being hurt and roughing up the police, that was the biggest, thing.
Yeah.
But, they had the match. Bruiser went over, beat Karras. And fans that were in attendance, I wasn't, I was too young at the time, but fans that I know who were there said it was a stinker. Karras was just bad, probably, work like Zulu.
God help us.
Or Mike Wayne, Dick the Bruiser versus Mike Wayne. Now there's a match everybody, that's why it didn't pay off, But
Bruiser got fined for that too, didn't he? Big fine.
yeah, well, he got suspended. The Michigan Athletic Commission suspended him, and that was legitimate. It wasn't one of these New York, kind of works. Yeah, Bruiser got, suspended, from, wrestling in Detroit. So that was in, 1963, he was done here.
And I had heard that somebody, whether it was the commission or the courts, probably the courts, fined him $50,000 for the damages to the bar and the injuries to the police officer and others who were hurt in the fight. He left Detroit, did not return until the late 60s when that fine was finally paid by a conglomerate, I think the Olympia people, who wanted Dick back in Detroit to run opposition to the Sheik.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that later,
Yeah.
But we're going on the Dick the Bruiser timeline. But in 1964, after, he, was banned from working in, the Detroit territory, he bought the Indianapolis territory with Wilbur Snyder from Jim Barnett. I think that was at the time when Barnett was leaving to go to Australia.
Exactly.
And he owned the Indianapolis territory, and he owned the Detroit territory also.
And there's, again, some contradiction, perhaps, over whether Bruiser and Snyder paid for the territory, or whether they just went in and started to promote.
Right. They, just run him out of town because they knew he was leaving.
Yeah.
And I thought there was like a rumor or truth to it that Bruiser and Snyder tried to buy the Detroit territory.
Did they?
Yeah,
Maybe
from
so.
Barnett.
Uh-huh.
But, come to find out, the Sheik ended up buying it in 64 and didn't sit well with Bruiser, at all.
Yeah.
But, from 1964 to, 1989, he ran his promotion, the WWA, World Wrestling Association, in Indianapolis and, towns around there.
You know who the promoter was on paper?
Was it Sam Menaker?
No.
Or his wife?
His mother.
His mother?
At least initially, yeah. Margaret was the promoter because you couldn't have a wrestler be a promoter.
Okay. And I'm sure, like you mentioned earlier, she helped him get the promoting license there, too.
I'm sure.
Yeah, she pushed that through.
Yeah.
It's amazing what politicians can do.
Oh, yeah, because years later, when Bruiser was in opposition to the Sheik here in Detroit, I was in the office when the Sheik was angling, trying to get a promoter's license in Indiana. And he was told, we're not giving out anymore. We don't need any more wrestling in Indiana. And there were a couple, Bruiser and Snyder had theirs, and then there were a couple basically small-time people who had licenses that the Sheik was going to try to, worm in on their license, but it never happened.
Yeah.
Because the Sheik was actually planning on going into Indianapolis at one time.
But, we got to say one thing for him. Dick the Bruiser's WWA promotion lasted longer than, big-time wrestling here in Detroit.
Yeah.
Because it lasted, he started in 1964 and didn't close up shop until 1989. But, he had a good working agreement with Vern Gagne, from the AWA. So they were getting a lot of, those guys.
Yeah. Well, same thing happened there as happened here. The cards toward the end were, good, nice, somewhat capable, some very capable wrestlers, but it just wasn't the caliber of what people were used to.
And, he was getting older.
And the Bruiser had the same thing, the same formula every time. He'd get beat up for a little bit, and then he'd beat the piss out of whoever happened to be in the ring with him, and they'd go home. That was it, every single time.
Yeah. But, while he had his WWA promotion, he also owned the Harem Lounge. The bar in Indianapolis. And he hosted a lot of the boys, after the wrestling shows. And then, in 1965, we know about, him trying to run against the Sheik back in 1971, that promotion. But a lot of people don't know he tried to go against the Sheik because I think that anger that he got cut out of buying, Detroit promotion from Jim Barnett. And he tried to run against the Sheik, in 1965,
Yeah.
here in Detroit. And he taped TV shows at the Leland Hotel in downtown Detroit. And that ran on Channel 50. And
How long did it run? Do you know?
not long, 3 months. They ran some shows at the Olympia in March, April, and May.
Yeah.
And then, out of nowhere,
And the Sheik was running Cobo. And here's the Olympia thing again. The
Yeah.
Olympia name tends to creep in on all of these. Lou Marutis, Lincoln Cavallari, the
Yep.
two power brokers, and Olympia and various other industries. I think they were pulling a lot of the strings and the money.
yeah. So, his, first stab at, going against the Sheik's promotion, was a complete failure, within months.
Yeah.
But Dick the Bruiser, he helped a lot of guys along the way. But I want to talk about one guy in particular that he started, became world famous, hated, like no other, beloved years later like no other. And you know who that would be?
Ox?
No.
No. Super Brucey.
No. I'm not going to tell you.
You're not?
And I'm not going to tell you fans either.
Why, you?
Until next week when we come back and do part 2 of the Dick the Bruiser story. See
All
you
right.
next week.
See ya.
Same time, 7 o'clock.